It is the anniversary of 9/11. Have we won the war on terrorism? Mueller's team wiped or lost 27 phones. Totally clear. Biden spokesman tries to duck low the question. The NFL protests and is met with boos. And Lululemon wants you to resist capitalism. Welcome, friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. Honored to have you here with me. As we all know, today is a day that we'll always remember as a country. I know there's a lot of people sharing their personal memories. I'll tell you about some of mine over the course of today, but it changed many lives. We lost many lives, and it also altered the course of the entire world. Right? The future of the planet was changed on this day back on September 11th, 2001. 19 years have passed. And obviously, it has been a series of events that led up to this and then after it that we have had to confront that we know of as the war on terror. And I have to say, those who told us that we would never have a signing on the deck of the aircraft carrier to signal the end of this were correct. There hasn't been a day in which we would say that the war on terror is over, because the war on terror will never be over. There's no such thing. Terror is a tactic that stretches back for as long as there's been human society of any kind. People use violence and fear for their own advantage, for the acquisition of power. But if we're talking about radical jihadism, and you could obviously argue there is no other form of jihadism, then you could also look at what's happened in the most recent iterations of this conflict and say, we basically have won. We have defeated, for now. I'm not saying it won't be resurgent. Remember, the Allies defeated Germany in World War I, and then there was World War II. We could see a resurgence of this. It's not over in that sense. But I remember what it was like. I remember being in the CIA and people talking about how we were going to be fighting in Iraq for as long as the Lebanese Civil War went on, which was 15 years. We have been in Afghanistan, although not in continuous fighting the same way as you've seen in other conflicts. We've been in Afghanistan now for 20 years, basically, almost 19 years. And the country has learned some very painful lessons in this whole process. But while we're all being instructed by the media to panic over COVID, just remember that there were also many times when they wanted us to panic even more than was vaguely necessary over the threat of jihadism. There were remember the color coding system, the creation of the TSA, so many of these things that now we look back on and say, what were we doing? The creation of the National Counterterrorism Center, the Director of National Intelligence Office, the DNI, did we need any of that? Did we really fix the problems of stovepiping of intelligence between the various agencies and the lack of sharing with the FBI, the CIA, and the other three-letter and assorted agencies of the federal government and the national security apparatus? Those are questions that no one can definitively answer, but the good news is, and I think that we should spend some time on that, the good news is that we are in a period here of relative calm when it comes to jihadism. After multiple wars, after innumerable covert operations and black ops insertions abroad, we have managed to temporarily at least neutralize most of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And President Trump does not get nearly enough credit from this, and he won't. But the roll-up of ISIS, the rapid collapse and the taking of Raqqa, that was something that we were told, even under the Obama administration, would be far more costly, far more difficult, because Obama wasn't somebody who was really leading on any national security issue. He was always looking for consensus. And consensus, when you're talking about battlefield tactics, when you're talking about fighting against committed radicals willing to lose their lives, is often just too slow or just wrong. The Obama administration, you'll recall, was marked with many mass casualty terrorist attacks in Europe and here in the United States. We've seen far less of that. You think of the mass casualty attacks in the name of the Islamic State, San Bernardino attack, Pulse nightclub in Florida. There were the first year of the Obama presidency, people often forget this, but there was Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, the so-called underwear bomber. And while it did seem so ridiculous to everyone, this guy lit himself, in effect, on fire and almost blew himself away, including, his most sensitive areas. He did almost bring down that plane, which would have killed over 100 people over Detroit on Christmas Day in the first year of the Obama presidency. We were just lucky that he was unable to ignite that device. And then there was Faisal Shahzad in Times Square, the Times Square bomber. Another time when, if he had just been a little bit more competent in his bomb building, he would have easily killed dozens, perhaps over 100 people in Times Square on a beautiful day in New York City, not far from when I was sitting as the bomb went off. We've had vehicle attacks, including here on the west side of Manhattan and Chelsea. We've had attacks in cities across the country. It's hard to remember all of them, but it has calmed down quite a bit. It turned out that trying to appease radical Islam, that going around the world bowing and apologizing for America was not an effective national security strategy. That was not going to do it. And President Trump in office has been a necessary corrective to that. One of the things that I remember most from 9/11, and those of you who have been listening to me for years now, and I'm very honored when I think about the fact that there are so many of you across the country, in all 50 states now, who have spent at least a portion of your day, 5 days a week with me, going on now 7 years. What do I remember? Some of you will know these anecdotes, but I was in college on 9/11. I was actually going to Shakespeare class. I was studying Shakespeare in college, as one does. I had been in 3 Arabic classes, I think, in advance of this, because I was already interested in the Middle East. I had managed to maneuver my way into an upper-level generally a seniors-only seminar on Arab-Israeli conflict, and I just thought it would be an interesting area to specialize in. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden, the recognition, as we found out more about what happened that day, that we were going to go to war, and who knows for how long and with how many different groups, perhaps even countries. I remember going back to my dorm and watching on TV and seeing the second plane hit, because we were excused right away from class after the first plane hit. And I hope that I remember all this as it is. With these kinds of traumatic events, as you know, sometimes people can have timeline errors. But I remember very clearly seeing as the second plane hit and the recognition that now this was obviously an attack. This was no accident. When I first sat down, as everyone else, I think, or mostly believed, the initial impression was that this was just a tragic accident. But then we figured out very quickly that it was an insidious mass casualty attack. And I watched as the towers fell one after the other. I remember thinking how many people I might know in those buildings. The husband of my mother's sister, my uncle through marriage, working in one of the towers. He was late to work that day, otherwise he'd be gone. And I remember recognizing and saying out loud, "We are going to war." Changed the course of my life. Otherwise, I likely would have been someone who went to work on Wall Street or management consulting or something. Try to find my way to enough success and comfort that I could get a decent house in the suburbs, find a nice wife, and call it a day. Instead, I joined the CIA, got assigned to the Counterterrorism Center, went to Iraq, northern Iraq, when it was a particularly spicy area of the country in 2007, went back to central Iraq in 2008, deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. and came home from that and worked for the NYPD Intelligence Division. Came in right after the Najib Azazi attack, and then was assigned to the NYPD task force working the Faisal Shahzad case, the Times Square bomber, among other averted attacks that we worked on during my time there. So it obviously changed the course of my life, but I was very lucky in that I didn't have any family members lost, and I know so many of you did. I was very lucky that I wasn't a fireman or a member of the NYPD or a flight attendant on one of those flights or a pilot or someone working in the Pentagon that day. What did we learn from 9/11 as a country? One thing is that evil exists, and if it can catch you sleeping, it will. You have to be ever vigilant because there will be evil forces at work in this world, no matter how powerful, wealthy, successful we are as a nation. There will be those ideologies, those beliefs, those impulses from other human beings to tear us down and destroy us. I know it became something of a laugh line among the liberal left for a while that they hate us for our freedom, but the people that drove planes into those buildings did, in fact, hate us for our freedom. And their comrades and colleagues today haven't changed their ideological predispositions at all. They're absolutely in agreement with that if they could destroy us as a society, they would. And then there are those within our own country who you would think would have rallied to our side, you would think would understand the stakes and would stop rooting against us because of their own narrow parochial interests or their desire to always be proven right as domestic radicals who want to see this country brought low and then transformed. They still are very much here as well. One of my strongest memories from 9/11 was the gathering, the only all-school gathering that I can remember having when I was at Amherst College, pretty left-wing place in central Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley. I remember a professor standing up before the whole student body and saying, "This is what happens when you make people angry." You see, to a certain kind of left-wing intellectual, to a certain kind of, let's just say it, radical Democrat, socialist, Marxist, America actually got what it deserved that day. There were people who were saying that then. We remember this. That this was a response to our foreign policy. There were academics who said this. There were journalists who believed this. Maybe they waited a while to write such things or say things out loud, but there was that belief. There was a flag burning on my campus within weeks of 9/11. Explicitly. These were students explicitly going forward to say that we got what we deserved. So while we can all talk about our unity, and we should, because the vast majority of Americans, yes, including our fellow Americans who are Democrats, a vast majority recognize what the gravity of the situation was and rallied to our flag and rallied to our country, and we should remember that. But there was an element within our own borders that saw what happened, that saw us attacked in this particularly dire and vulnerable moment and thought, this is something that we can work with. This will be advantageous for us. And you even see some elements of that still today. Don't ever forget there are enemies, foreign and domestic. That's one of the lessons we should take from 9/11, because neither of them have gone away. As much progress as we've made and as many sacrifices as our military, law enforcement, and first responders have engaged in over the last almost 20 years. What does COVID-19 have to do with you losing your house? Well, it's pretty straightforward. The FBI says that 75% increase in cybercrime is our reality right now during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you know what that means? Your stuff is online. People can find your home's title, your information, and then the bad guys can use a quitclaim deed to push you off and put themselves on. Then they take out loans. They basically steal the equity in your home and leave you with the payments. Might even see a foreclosure notice before you even know what's happened. The usual identity theft services don't protect you. You have to take action today with Home Title Lock. Go to HomeTitleLock.com and use the promo code BUCK to get yourself 30 free days of protection. You can also check to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. Plus, you can check to see if you're a victim and don't know it yet. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK. Why in God's name is all buildings matter trending on social media right now? What the heck are people thinking? What is wrong with people? All buildings matter. They think that this is clever now. Oh, okay, because BLM is similar in its gravity and seriousness to almost 3,000 Americans being either incinerated or crushed to death in a terrorist attack on all of us, including black and brown Americans, including people who are black and brown who weren't Americans, who were visiting that day, who were foreign nationals. It was an attack on all of us. But we can't even expect true unity in this country on a day like this because the BLM lunatics want to pretend that this is of similar gravity and seriousness, that incidents like the Michael Brown shooting are to be thought of at the same level, the same categorization of seriousness as the 9/11 attack. BLM is an intellectually and morally unserious movement, you see. You have to remember that. People don't want to hear that, and of course anybody in the movement would go into a fit of apoplexy. They would lose their minds if you said that to them, but it's true. It's true. If they were serious, they wouldn't do these things. They wouldn't say and support these things. The trend started because a Black Lives Matter supporter wrote on Twitter, 9/11 is sad, but let's remember that all buildings matter. And in response to the attention the tweet received, according to Newsweek here, there was follow-up to this anyway. So hashtag all buildings matter is now the number one trending Twitter thing in the world because the crybabies of the BLM movement, listen to us. We don't really have arguments, but if you don't listen, we'll scream in your face and we'll burn down your building. I've listened. When they say that police are racist and killing black people regularly in large numbers, systematically, without consequence, they're lying. So I've listened. It's not true. What else am I supposed to listen to exactly? But you see, they use disrespect to what is sacred to reasonable people to get attention for what is exaggerated in the minds of brainwashed people. 9/11 is a day that affected the entire country. It's a day where the forces of evil killed almost 3,000 of us, and if they could have, would have killed 3 million of us in one day. Oh, but the BLM activists want to compare it to 8 people who are unarmed, doesn't mean unthreatening, shot 8 black Americans. It's always the focus on black Americans who were shot. You know, there was a kid who had autism who was shot recently, a white kid, 13 years old, running, his mother says, and shot by police, wasn't killed. No protests about that. So I guess it doesn't matter as much to these activists? No, of course not. It does not matter as much to them. But just remember, they're showing you, the BLM activists, the BLM movement, the Democrat Party, the Biden voters, the left, they're showing you who they are right now with this all buildings matter. That's right. Slapping America in the face on this most solemn of days. That's just what the left is all about. New from #1 New York Times bestselling author Vince Flynn, Total Power, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills. In this next thriller in the bestselling Mitch Rapp series, it's a race against the clock when ISIS takes out the entire U.S. power grid, throwing the country into chaos. The story keeps you on the edge of your seat while taking you through a destructive cyber attack on our nation, making you ask yourself, will it be lights out for America, or can our top assassin save us from plunging into darkness? We all know how vulnerable the power grid is We know the bad guys, the terrorists, have been targeting it for a long time. This takes you into what that would be like for this country. The Real Book Spy calls Total Power a serious contender for Best Book of the Year. If you're a fan of suspense and thrillers, this is the book for you. Take Back the Power, Total Power. The new Mitch Rapp thriller from Vince Flynn, available September 15th in hardcover, ebook, and audio. Pre-order now. Now let's talk policy. As we think about the greatest threats this country faces right now, our single biggest threat as a nation right now is internal political division. That can spiral out of control. That can pull us apart. It can undermine any of our institutions, a phrase the libs love to use about Trump as they are constantly undermining institutions. It can pull apart our law enforcement, pull apart our elections. It can make us think that the entire system is corrupt in ways that are unfixable. If you're wondering what's our biggest external enemy, until recently, I would have said it was jihadism. Radical Islam as an ideology meant to confront Western American Judeo-Christian civilization, right? And it was existential insofar as if they could have wiped us out, they would have, but they couldn't. And now they've lost so many fighters and so many battles and spent so many and used so much of their resources. We always focus on the drain from America, which of course we should, of blood and treasure into these conflicts. But remember that it's not an endless flow of committed fighters on the other side either, especially as we don't get involved in places where we don't need to be. Let local conflicts remain local outside of our own borders to the extent that we can. It's a lesson we've learned. Look, I was somebody who thought the Bush administration with Rumsfeld and Cheney and these all these very powerful neocon think tanks in D.C. and the Pentagon policy planners like Wolfowitz. I remember I had dinner with Wolfowitz once, lunch actually, deeply unimpressive guy. But anyway. He wouldn't remember, I would, because I sat there thinking, this is the guy who's the architect of all this stuff? And it was when he was still Wolfowitz. But we've learned lessons from those mistakes, I think, and we understand that there's nothing conservative about sending our own people to go rebuild societies for other people who are not Americans and not even necessarily in allied countries. But if you're wondering what the biggest threat we face now as a country external to this nation, it would be China. And the president knows this. The president is right about this. He has been all along. And I think everyone's waking up to it. When I visited China a year ago, a little over a year ago now, I remember thinking, this is not a place that is looking to do its own thing and just be prosperous and be left alone. This is a massive country with over 1 billion people that is ruled with an iron fist, that has no real concept or care for human rights. I mean, from the government level, for human rights, individual dignity, rule of law, and will enforce its will upon people. And a lot of Chinese nationals will go along with all of this because glory, the national pursuit of glory, can be a very powerful elixir. And even people who are just working, even just laborers, people doing the most mundane jobs, if they believe that their membership, if you will, in a nationality, in a nation-state family, makes them more powerful, makes them part of something important, there's a lot that ruling body, that government can get away with. So China is our biggest opponent economically, and give it time, it will also be militarily. I'm certainly hoping that we never go head-to-head in a direct conflict with China. That would be, it would be catastrophic in ways that it's hard to even imagine. I mean, it would the casualty rates. I've seen some of the wargaming on this, and it's horrible. But it might be more along the lines of the fight for influence, first on the Chinese national periphery. So the various countries that it bumps up against right now India, Russia, the littoral states, the island nations and countries that have island chains as a major part of their geography, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea. How does China interact with all of them? And is it able to flip them to China's side in what is going to become a great power struggle along the lines of what we saw between the U.S. and the Soviet Union? That's what we're heading for now. Anyone who would study history would see this coming. And we know that this is the trajectory we're on. So China is the biggest external threat. Can we all agree on that? I mean, it's 9/11. We should remember ignoring a growing threat can have catastrophic consequences, as it did on that day. So wouldn't it be in our interest as a nation to understand now, to turn and face the likeliest place? We don't always know. We're not always right, obviously. But the likeliest place where a major strategic level threat to this country comes from. Anyone who knows foreign policy, anything about the military, national security, international relations, knows that it's got to be China, right? Apparently not. What do you think the libs believe is the biggest nation-state threat we face, or nation-state level threat? What could end us as a society if we don't rise to the challenge? Here's the former head of the Department of Homeland Security under the Obama administration, Jay Johnson, with an answer. Play 3.
Joe, I have to say the number one threat to our nation and to our world is global warming. And it's a threat, as we see in California right now, and it's a threat because we are failing to address it. As Barack Obama used to say, it is a slow motion emergency. And unfortunately, our political leaders always deal with the thing that is on the top of their inbox. This has been a crisis for some time now that we are failing to address, and we're seeing the evidence of it more and more year after year.
Global warming, the biggest threat we face. You see the way they're talking about these wildfires in Oregon and in California. I actually just had someone, a listener, reach out and say that she's in a place where they might have to be evacuated because of the wildfires. I know it's very serious. Whether it's wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, it's always climate change. Or as Jay Johnson says, global warming. But I thought we didn't call it that anymore. Can we just be clear on what the proper name is for this scientific phenomenon that they say is the greatest national security threat? The biggest threat we face, climate change. CO2 in the air. You're breathing out CO2 right now. The biggest threat we face as a country, as a species, is too much of that in the air, in the atmosphere. We live in a time of mass media combined with mass hysteria, friends, and the results are not good. Doesn't strike me as plausible that somebody who has not been pressured, brainwashed over time could really think that the biggest threat that we face is climate change. There's a lot of other stuff out there. We've got countries with nuclear weapons. We've got nation states that we're supposed to liberalize as they became enormously powerful and populous. It's not happening. We have a resurgence of Marxism in our own country as well as in some countries abroad. And we're told the biggest, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, which if you go back in this show, people asked, I remember it was last summer, I was almost exactly a year ago, said somebody asked Buck, what really worries you? And I said, pandemic disease. And that's true. You can go back and check the transcript. I said it because it was, I knew I'd seen the modeling that we would eventually be in a place where we are right now. In fact, we could have been through something much, much worse. But now they tell us that with all the things that we face, with all the challenges we see, climate change, that's right. What's really going to ruin us is if you don't turn off your air conditioners and let your house get to be about 80 degrees during a heat wave What's really going to ruin us is if you don't bicycle enough, if you drive a car that's not an electric car, if you think that you should have enough power and not pay 5 times the current rate for it to run your appliances and your TV. And why are they opposed to nuclear energy? Because nuclear energy is the solution, the technological solution that we already have to all of this. But then that makes their whole windmills and solar power obsession obsolete. So it's not about science. It's about belief and it's about control. You see it with climate change. You also see it with COVID-19. So let's just all remember this. Here we are on 9/11. We remember those who lost their lives. We remember the dead. We remember the bravery of men and women that day. And then we remember the millions of Americans who took up arms and joined our military, went overseas, served in this war on terror. And while the strategy wasn't always perfect, our military acquitted itself with unbelievable bravery, dignity, and success. And we took out so many of the worst psychopathic scum on the planet in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries in the region. And after all that, we turn around now and we are in what will soon again be, as we get past this disease, a Pax Americana, P-A-X, not P-O-X. And the liberals want to focus on CO2 in the air. Mass hysteria, friends. How desperate are the Democrats right now to defeat Donald Trump? But what are they willing to do? I can't give you a real answer to the question. I don't think anyone can, because there's still so many weeks left, and whatever I think would be the outer limit of their insanity, I'm sure they're going to exceed those outer limits. But one storyline, one claim that you'll continue to hear is not that President Trump was not great on COVID or missed some things on COVID. They have gone so far beyond that, which I think is also wrong, but they've gone so far beyond that they will now openly claim that President Trump is directly responsible for the almost 200,000 deaths from COVID-19. This is absolutely nuts. Here is Chuck Schumer, among the most odious members of the United States Congress. Play 6.
There are thousands of my fellow New Yorkers who are dead right now, and it can be directly attributed to the president's lack of action, lying about this crisis. No question about it. That's why we don't have testing. That's why we are not on top of this, because he swept it under the rug. On January 26th, I called for the president to make it a national emergency. January 26th, he did nothing for a month.
What was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to do? And they never answer this question. It's never clear. He was going to lock down the country before anyone had died here? That was the plan? It's easy to say now, well, yeah, we should have done that, but would people have gone along with it? Would the public have listened? They don't have the resources to enforce all this stuff. I mean, even here in New York, which has turned into a little tyranny of stupidity because of Cuomo and de Blasio. Even here in New York City, they can't tell if you're quarantining or where you're going or what. They have no idea. And they've got a lot of resources here, a lot of government bureaucrats to order around. Huge police force, which should not be involved in, mask enforcement or social distancing enforcement, but that's what they like to do. They like to order them to be their own little social distancing Stasi. Eli Lake tweeted out today, 675,000 Americans were killed during the Spanish flu pandemic. Some of those deaths may have been avoided if Woodrow Wilson bothered to say anything about it, but no one serious, says President Wilson, killed 675,000 Americans because it's moronic. Exactly. President Trump hasn't killed anybody. There's no order you can point to that shows that President Trump put people in. They said we don't have enough ventilators. President Trump used the Defense Production Act, got enough ventilators. We don't have enough PPE. Defense Production Act got everybody the PPE they need. We don't have enough hospital beds. Sent a hospital ship up here to New York. Saw it float by on the Hudson River. Set up hospital tents in Central Park. Turned the Javits Convention Center into a multi-thousand bed facility. Didn't even really use any of this stuff because they didn't need all these beds. But where was Trump asleep at the wheel? Where was the falling down on the job? Oh, because he said, they're always so obsessed, fixated. They'll find some phrase, something that he said at some point in time that isn't even tied to any action and say, see, he said that thing and that wasn't accurate. And so everything else that happened after that is his fault. These people are absolutely nuts. They'll say anything. Joe Biden, of course, has to read from the script here, and I don't really mean that as a term of art. I mean he's reading from scripts a lot. Here he is on how it's all the president's fault. Play 24.
On the day that we hit 190,000 dead in the United States because of COVID-19, we just learned from the Washington Post columnist Bob Woodward that the President of the United States has admitted on tape in February he knew about COVID-19 that had passed through the air. He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months. He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people.
He failed to do his job on purpose? Think about how stupid that is as a claim. Why would he fail to do his job on purpose, Joe Biden, you moron? What benefit would the president have from doing? Just put aside whether that's even a true claim. They will say anything. It doesn't matter. They'll lie.